Thanks for the invitation to speak today and for the opportunity to celebrate this important occasion with the wider community. I think so. This presentation is I guess pretty much a light touch historical approach, and it will become obvious why I've chosen to give the presentation that way. And I thought it would be helpful in the first instance to tell you a little bit more about myself and my career. I've started to work at Pfizer in 1998, and I've pretty much been working on crystallization almost exclusively since the year 2000. When I was actually looking for photos of our lab and what it looked like when I first started at Pfizer. So I did look in some of our archive drives for photos of the lab, but instead what I found is thousands and thousands of photos of crystals, and you can have a little flavor of the sort of things that I've encountered on this slide, and you can see there's pretty much a spectrum of different crystals, from nasty agglomerates to needle-like particles to nice well-formed cubes. So I think that this to me reiterates the importance of having the right tools for crystallization development. So in the end, I did manage to find some photos, maybe somewhere online, but I just wanted to show you what the sort of equipment that we were using when I first started at Pfizer. So to measure solubility, essentially using turbidity, we'd have to rely on this probe-based system, which were pretty large in size. So typically we would be able to stick one of these probes in an automated lab reactor, and the minimum size really that we could work at will be half a litre to a litre. So you can see what the issues will be there. So a typical solubility measurement will take a lot more material. The cycle time will be typically a lot longer because we weren't able to run parallel measurements. Sometimes we'd be able to get multiple data points by doing serial dilutions, but again, probably not ideal altogether. And generally speaking, there was a lot of complexity because you obtain data from different platforms, which you then had to recombine in Excel, and in the end, your kind of price per session will be this plots that you see here, which looks very crude by today's standard. That would essentially allow you to determine what your material is going into solution and when it started to crystallize again. So I still recall my first encounter with what now is the Crystal 16. So it was in the first time I heard about it was in 2003, in early 2003, at a Tech user forum in New York, and Lisa Aggox, now Lisa McQueen, I think, who works at Johnson & Johnson now, gave an excellent presentation on the development of crystallization processes that was going on at the time at Crystalix and Avantium. And this was, I think she didn't necessarily touch upon the Crystal 16 during the presentation, but we talked about it afterwards, and I instantly saw the value of the platform and the business benefits that it will bring about. So the very first box that we had looked like what you see in the picture. So it looks very different from what we have now. So it was this nice silver box with the lights shining at the bottom. And I actually, I'm a bit of a hoarder, so I have lots of emails, and I was able to trace the original receipt for our first Crystal 16 order, and we actually received our first Crystal 16 on the 23rd of September of 2004, and this, to my knowledge, was the first unit that was installed outside of Avantium, so this was in our group. And of course, those of you who are good at maths will realize that that's 17 years ago and not 16 years ago. There is a caveat to that. It's because, well, strictly speaking, what we received was not a Crystal 16, but it was at the time it was known as a Minimax. And before that, it was known as a Disco Max, because the kind of the red lights, I believe the red lights coming out of the wells actually flashed and resembled a little bit like a disco floor that you can see in the GIF that I've attached to this slide. And the name Crystal 16 only came on the following year. But again, as I said, the platform began to, you know, the value was obvious, and the platform was incorporated in our workflow with really good results straight away, to the point that within a few months we were able to do our first publication that talked about using the Crystal 16 within our workflow. So in particular, at that time, we referred to it as a process analytical technique, which is ultimately what it is, and the ability to implement it at a scale as small as 1 milliliter obviously was a very significant step forward for us, and essentially reducing the amount of material that we were using typically for solubility and metastable zone width determination by almost 100-fold, really. So a couple of things that I wanted to bring out just from that publication. So first of all, that particular publication described a two-step approach to solvent selection for crystallization, and to a great extent, that's not changed a lot from what we do now. So typically we work with our partners in high throughput screening, and they will look at say 40 different solvents and give us an idea of the solubility at a couple of temperatures. So this gives us an opportunity to reduce the number of possible solvent or solvent combinations that we might want to consider. What we then do, we take those promising solvents or solvent mixtures, and we develop full solubility and metastable zone width curves using the Crystal 16. And again, that's interestingly enough, the paper captures that the platform was formerly known as the Minimax. The other thing that's worth adding is that, you know, as I said, our workflow hasn't necessarily changed a great deal. I would say that the only thing that we've introduced in between the two steps is some element of solubility prediction. Now, there are, of course, a priori approach to solubility predictions, but we tend to favor hybrid approaches where you create these models that are based on existing solubility data and use them for additional prediction. So at that point, what we can do is to either go back and screen additional solvents or solvent mixtures based on these predictions, or go ahead and refine the ranges, for example, when we consider solvent mixtures. So there's this cycle that goes back until we get lucky. And of course, you know, this is a vast simplification, because it assumes that we only ever work with cooling crystallizations, which we know in practice it's unrealistic, but it kind of exemplifies our quest for the right solvent. This is some more data from the same paper, and again, I wanted to talk about this because this was the first instance of us encountering unexpected benefits to using the Crystal 16. So for this particular piece of work, we were trying to measure the metastable zone width and the solubility for a compound and in a particular solvent system, and we essentially were running 3 cycles. So for each data point, we're heating and cooling 3 times at the same heating and cooling rates. And what we observed is that we were able to build a set of 2 curves for the first cycle. However, for the second and third cycle, particularly at the lower concentrations and the lower temperatures, we did define a second set of curves, which is also shown in here. And what is subsequently transpired is that that, and we didn't know this at the time, is that the particular compound likes to form a solvate in this particular solvent system, and obviously kinetically the solvate in certain conditions forms more readily than the desolvated form. So at the lower temperature and lower concentration, we see that species forming first, and we were able to measure the solubility and the metasomal with edge of that particular solid. But also as a result, the transition point between the two forms, so the desolvated sol form and the solvated form, which again is important in terms of de-risking the formation of the unwanted solvates. So again, more of the same. This was a later piece of work. So much later on, we had this compound, which again had really interesting physical properties. So in particular, we saw that there were 3 solid forms. 2 of them were linked together by an anisotropic relationship. And of course, we wanted one particular form, form C. However, form B and form C were really close in stability and therefore in solubility. So kinetically, form B appeared, even when form C was the most stable form, form B appeared to be crystallizing more readily. And then because of the small difference in thermodynamic stability between B and C, the conversion between form B and form C was really difficult. And what where the Crystal16 helped, again, we were able to because of the difficulty in the 2 forms converting from one to the other, we were able to actually measure the metastables, or the solubility curves independently for the 2 forms, and determine the crossover temperature with a good degree of accuracy. Again, this is an important point because it informs the development of the crystallization steps. So we know that, for instance, form C is the more stable form below 37 degrees. So we would essentially try and nucleate below that temperature to try and maximize the likelihood of us obtaining the desired form. So of course, then the next big thing, I think, for me in terms of Crystal16 application was the work that Joop and his team published starting in 2011. And again, this to me opened a whole new frontier in terms of what we can do with the Crystal16, and I'm sure there will be more about this in the course of this event. But to me, obviously, you know, it opens up several doors, and still there are questions that potentially can be practical questions that can be answered using some of these methodologies and the Crystal16. So particularly around understanding the impurity, the effect of impurities or additives on nucleation rates. And even more so when there are polymorphic species involved, whether, for instance, one impurity can selectively influence the nucleation of one polymorph but not the other, therefore going perhaps some way to explain certain instances of polymorph disappearance, or helping us to prevent the unwanted isolation of an undesired polymorph. And then the other thing that this can ultimately help us with is if we start then standardizing and comparing nucleation rates for different compounds, we can then begin to maybe rationalize the metastables on width of all species, really, and then maybe get into crystallizability prediction, which again are really important in organic research and development in general. So just as some closing points for me, really. I think we've actually gotten pretty good at crystallization, which is not to say that we can do everything. So I think when it comes to experimental traditional crystallization, I think we have an array of tools that can help us to understand and develop robust and reproducible processes, scalable processes. However, where I think we still have work to do is around the prediction elements of crystallization development. Of course, there are pockets of activities and there are certain elements that we can use as it stands, but I'm envisaging a future where we essentially, from the molecular structure, the 2D structure of a species, we can predict a whole bunch of properties which ultimately will inform crystallization development in a much more rapid fashion. So from the molecular structure, for instance, to the prediction of the crystal structure, which we see emerge as a real tool in pharmaceutical development and crystallization development in general. Then from the crystal structure, then predicting things like solubility, crystallizability, nucleation and phase-specific growth rate, and even mechanical properties and bulk properties. So we can start to think about how the physical properties of our crystals influence downstream processes, such as drug product manufacturing. And this is, I've highlighted some areas, whereas I think, of course, the Crystal16 still very much plays a role, and again, in terms of helping us to understand solubility, but also in terms of building standardized databases that we can start to use for machine learning predictions around solubility, crystallizability, and nucleation. So again, I very much think that tools like the Crystal16 play a big role there. And then the second area where I think we need to do more work is around what I call particle engineering. So attaining particles that cannot be obtained through traditional crystallization means. So, for example, when you have persistent needles that, no matter what solvents or additives or supersaturation rate you use during the crystallization, will always come out as needles. But there is an emerging family of techniques which we are calling co-processed API that essentially allow to overcome these practical difficulties. And this is, I can at this point highlight a paper from last year that was put together by an IQ consortium, an IQ working group that I'm a member of, and I would invite you to read this manuscript to find out more about these emerging technologies and what we feel the gaps are. Then, of course, last but not least, I would like to thank some of my partners in crime, and I'm delighted to say that even though it's been a long time, we're still working together and we're still doing mischief together. So Melissa and Steve in particular, but then of course this is ultimately the culmination of a long and productive partnership with a number of companies that have pushed, devised and implemented this technology. So obviously you need to thank colleagues at Avantium and Crystallis and Technobis, of course. And just to say, I still think we've got very exciting times ahead, and I think that the Crystal16 will very much be a part of it. And thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Ivan.